we present our research on the project, Sea Level Rise Adaptation and Preparation Plan, Tuvalu, which examines how the nation is responding to the urgent challenges posed by rising sea levels. Tuvalu is a sovereign island nation located in the Western Pacific and is a proud member of the Commonwealth of Nations. The country consists of 9 islands, including 3 reef islands and 6 coral atolls, which contribute to its unique and low-lying geography. Since gaining independence in 1978, after being known as the British-administered Ellis Islands, Tuvalu has maintained a small population of approximately 9,500 residents as of 2024. One of the critical challenges it faces is its maximum elevation, which only reaches about 2 meters above sea level. This makes Tuvalu exceptionally vulnerable to the impacts of climate-induced sea level rise. Samantha Nazario here with the changes to the infrastructure of the built environment in Tuvalu. Today, we're looking at how Tuvalu, one of the world's most climate-vulnerable nations, is transforming its built environment to survive sea level rise. With limited land, high exposure to storms, and rising tides, Tuvalu's infrastructure is rapidly adapting, from coastal defenses to innovative land use strategies. In Funafuti, the capital, an alarming 46% of built land lies below the high tide line, emphasizing the urgent need for effective infrastructure. This situation stresses that infrastructure is no longer just about development. It is crucial for protecting homes, roads, and fresh water against flooding and saltwater intrusion. Thus, adapting infrastructure has become essential for the nation's survival. Tuvalu's largest project, the Tuvalu Coastal Adaptation Project, has built nearly 8 hectares of raised land and berm barriers on multiple islands to reduce coastal flooding. These sand-filled structures protect homes and allow for future development above sea level. The country is also using LiDAR data and coastal hazard modeling to guide safe infrastructure placement. Beyond the coast, other upgrades include harbor improvements on outer islands, airport runway enhancements, new water storage systems to deal with saltwater intrusion, and the introduction of compost toilets to protect fragile groundwater. Tuvalu is expanding solar power too, reducing overall diesel use and increasing energy independence. Looking ahead, Tuvalu is planning decades into the future. Its long-term adaptation plan, LTAP, includes raising entire neighborhoods and public infrastructure above future sea levels, aiming to create safe zones that will remain livable beyond the year 2100. This includes housing, roads, and even relocated recreational areas. These changes show that Tuvalu isn't just reacting, it's leading. By investing in smart, climate-resilient infrastructure, the country is building a future against the odds. It's a small island taking big steps to survive and thrive in the face of climate change.
Chrissy Landor with measures to reinforce buildings and homes in Tuvalu. As climate change intensifies, flooded coastlines, crumbling infrastructure, and damaged homes are becoming increasingly common in Tuvalu. There, rising sea levels and frequent storms threaten not only buildings but entire ways of life. To effectively reinforce homes in the face of climate change, a key strategy involves reviving and adapting traditional building practices that have long sustained coastal and vulnerable communities. By combining traditional design with modern sustainable innovation techniques like stilted structures and breathable materials such as thatched roofs made from leaves or earthen walls like adobe, it allows air and moisture to pass through. In hot, humid climates, these approaches reflect generations of environmental knowledge and adaptation. Integrating natural systems such as mangroves and rainwater harvesting into homes and villages can stabilize shorelines and absorb wave energy, as well as create natural buffers against storms, cool surrounding areas, and supports biodiversity, strengthening both coastal health and local food systems. At the same time, rainwater harvesting offers a sustainable freshwater source. Together, these strategies blend ecological resilience with cultural relevance, helping Tuvaluans adapt to climate extremes while staying rooted to their environments. Nature-based solutions must be context-specific and designed with the participation of local communities. Sedan et al. Rather than treating modern design as superior, adaptation plans should center local traditions as valid and evolving technologies. In terms of climate preparedness, integrating passive cooling systems, rainwater harvesting, and modular housing types can allow for more sustainable, self-sufficient homes in Tuvalu. Thanks for watching.
Hi, this is Piper Zadarine, and I'll be talking about the emergency evacuation route. If estimates are correct, by 2050, the island nation of Tuvalu will be the first country on Earth to be completely consumed by rising sea levels due to climate change. As such, a mass evacuation of the nation has already begun. Australia, which is the closest continent to Tuvalu, has established a treaty called the Philippi Union Treaty, which is the world's first bilateral visa agreement born from climate change. This agreement grants 280 Tuluvians permanent residency each year with access to healthcare, education, housing, and employment, with the goal to eventually evacuate the entire island. In the meantime, the remaining citizens need to establish an evacuation route to protect themselves and avoid against any potential disasters. The nation of Tuvalu is unique in that it has a population of about 10,000 people spread out across 9 small islands. A small percentage live on the outer islands in extended family households in small clustered villages, while the majority of the population live in Funafuti, the largest central island and the capital, in more Western-style houses. The entire nation is ruled by a prime minister who would be the one to issue the evacuation orders. The prime minister would need to radio nearby countries to arrange from air travel to and from Tuvalu. As Tuvalu is spread out, the biggest hurdle would be communicating the evacuation plan to the citizens. Funafuti has one radio station and its residents have access to satellite, so a countrywide broadcast would be the best for sounding the alarm. However, as the outer islands do not have access to regular electricity, a different method would need to be implemented to reach them. Inter-island travel is usually accomplished by a single government-run ferry or by privately owned boats, so the Prime Minister would need to send representatives to the outer islands to inform the residents and then have the ferry escort them back to Funafuti to either the airport or the docks. Flying would be the safest and quickest option, but the airport only has one runway and limited flight paths, so air travel would be severely limited. Residents would be flown to Fiji, which is the closest island, which would take about 2 hours. From Fiji, depending on the kind of natural disaster, they could shelter in place or take another flight to either Australia or New Zealand, which would be either 3 or 4 hours respectively. In the case air travel is too much of a bottleneck, evacuation by ship is possible, but dangerous and more time-consuming. Shipping vessels regularly bring imported groups from Fiji, Australia, New Zealand, and other surrounding areas, and could be used to take residents off island. As an island nation, most residents on Tuvalu already have access to boats, whether they be personal handmade canoes or just small passenger boats, and they will be able to evacuate themselves by sea to Fiji, but the distance is roughly 561 miles and could take up to 4 days. Complete evacuation is possible, but would require tremendous collaboration by both the nation of Tuvalu and its residents, as well as the neighboring islands.
Hi everyone, this is Shweta Maggio talking about plans to adapt to risk for Tuvalu. So plans can include natural and built infrastructure change. So coastal land protection and shoreline maintenance is really important, and this can include coastal restoration and habitat preservation, as well as soft shoreline maintenance and hard shoreline maintenance. So soft shoreline maintenance can look like shoreline setbacks or restoring and protecting mangroves and salt marshes, and beach nourishment. Hard shoreline maintenance can look like revetments, seawalls, breakwaters, and bulkheads. And connected to all of this is maintaining and restoring coral reefs. Coral reefs are an example of green infrastructure, natural infrastructure that helps to break waves and dissipate wave energy away from the coastline, so really operating as a natural breakwater. Additionally, Tuvalu should adapt structures. This can include raising infrastructure, elevating them off the ground, as well as retrofitting older infrastructure. Also, improving drainage in the case of flooding is really important, as well as using materials that are flood resistant. In terms of policy, standard implementation, and language around the goals Tuvalu wants to have with facing sea level rise is really important. Providing unified guidance and direction is very valuable, especially for, these are 9 islands with communities on each. So creating precedents for and prioritization of climate change related to legislature and policy and practices is important. And policy can include warning and alert systems and zoning regulations. And speaking about community, investing in empowering community is really important. All 9 islands are facing the same brunt of climate change, sea level rise. And, for collective action, each island's inhabitants should be involved in the implementation process as well as the decision making processes. And so, education and training for these things is really important. And folks can be trained for things such as like shoreline monitoring. And this also creates an opportunity for community to gather and collect and really build that social network and social resilience, which is so important when facing the uncertainty of climate change. And then finally, funding is really important. Securing financial support to help face the impacts of climate change and having the resources to implement these projects and programs is really important. So having funding, whether it be from government, whether it be from international organizations, from donors, is imperative to enable Tuvalu to continue to do this work and to continue to adapt and plan for the future as they face sea level rise.
And I'll be covering the public health measures for physical and mental health in Tuvalu. And firstly, it's important to look at the risk factors. Speaking in terms of physical health, this includes drowning or other bodily harm caused by flooding or extreme events, waterborne disease risk, which is associated with drinking water contamination that can happen as a result of flooding or infrastructure damage. Dehydration risk is associated as well with drinking water contamination. Malnutrition risk is associated with disturbed food production caused by flooding or other extreme weather. And then vector-borne disease risk increases as flooding or other extreme weather can increase the risk of coastal flooding, which allows for more vector breeding areas that can pose a more direct threat to residents. For mental health include a fear of displacement, a fear of loss of livelihood, a fear of cultural impacts or loss of culturally significant sites that are threatened by climate change, long-term stress and anxiety, depression, trauma from natural disasters, and a lack of access to mental care facilities. In fact, there is not a mental care hospital on Tuvalu itself. These risk factors, there are measures that must be taken to support public health. In terms of physical health, this includes evacuation plans to mitigate the risk of bodily harm caused by extreme weather events, water safety efforts to collect rainwater and prevent the contamination of drinking water sources, the prioritization of climate resilient crops to prevent crop failure in the face of extreme weather. In addition to this, food assistance strategies to provide residents with nutritious foods when local access is compromised as a sort of collaboration between other islands, and public health campaigns to prevent locals from mosquito and vector exposure through a series of behavior changes, wearing covering clothes that prevents skin exposure, mosquito netting over the bed, etc. In terms of mental health, measures for support would include secured funding for mental health facilities that are more accessible to locals, the establishment of affordable care networks for ongoing preventative mental health care that could prevent mental health crises. In addition, this would include securing funding for community healing spaces, which would allow residents to come together and express themselves and their concerns in a culturally responsive way. Education for disaster preparedness plans as a means to mitigate fear of uncertainty and to provide comfort and security in the face of some of that uncertainty. And then additionally, public health campaigns to equip locals with emotional regulation and other coping skills to manage stress and prevent long-term effects of ongoing stress.